chapter 7. We're going to have to, hang on just a minute, I got to push a button. I don't know what this button is. Go away. Okay. Anyway, Daniel chapter 7, we are going to review. The first part of Daniel chapter 7, if you remember, is a vision that Daniel had. This vision was the same picture as Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. But when Nebuchadnezzar saw this vision, he saw these empires as wonderful and beautiful, and they were, they were man's great empires. When God sees them, he sees them as evil beasts, evil, ugly beasts. And so what I want you to remember today in this lesson is that the word beast or beasts stands for a kingdom or a king. So like if we talk about a beast, it would be like Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, okay? And they're interchangeable. It would be like somebody saying the United States or President Trump. We know that President Trump represents the United States, and the United States is connected with President Trump, okay? So we're gonna kind of do those interfuse things. But I wanna go back and review, so I got you guys a paper. And on the paper, I've got some questions I want you to fill in the blanks. Who is the head of gold, which is also known as the lion with wings? He captured Jerusalem. He destroyed Solomon's temple in 587 BC on the 9th of Av. What king or kingdom is that? Yes, Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Very good. Notice the 9th of Av. I want you to pay attention to that. I got it big. Yeah. Okay, the next one. This is the chest of silver in chapter 2, and in chapter 7, he's the bear with 3 ribs. It's 2 people groups that came together to form the blank and blank empire. They captured Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. That's what their 3 ribs stood for. They crushed everything in sight, just like Iran and ISIS still do. You know, ISIS, when they came in, they destroyed all of the history, they destroyed all of the temple, they destroyed everything. And Cyrus, who was the king at that time, allowed the Jewish people to go back and build the temple, go back to the land and build the temple. So who was this? What? The Medes and the Persians. Very good. The Medes and the Persians. Very good. And Cyrus is the first leader of that. Okay, this one was the loins of bronze in chapter 2. This is the leopard with 4 heads in chapter 7. This is a swift leader who captured the whole known world within 11 years. And after Alexander's the head of this thing. After Alexander died, 4 generals took over. The Jewish suffering during this time was extreme, and this is the time between the Old and New Testament. So what country is this? What empire is this? Alexander was the head of it. It's Alexander the Great. Nope. One before that. Greece. Very good. Greece. This Alexander the Great is from Greece. Okay? And then in chapter 2, we see the legs of iron, and in chapter 7, we see this indescribable beast. It's the worst of man. This empire is the worst of man. It's evil and consuming. Jesus was born during this empire. The church was born during this empire. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD on the 9th of Av. Do you see that? Okay. And then this empire that was so huge has disintegrated into what chapter 2 calls clay and iron. So it's still here today, and it will be here in the future, but it's all mixed together. What empire is this? Rome. Very good. We are still a Roman world. You know, we still have the laws of Rome. We still have the background of Rome. Okay. I want you to notice something about the 9th of Av. I didn't write this in your papers, but I just wanted to give it to you because I just thought it was an amazing thing. If you'll notice, and the Jewish people call this the day of mourning. This is like the worst day in Jewish history. Let me find where I wrote them all out here. I have a list. And the reason, it's amazing how many things have happened to the Jewish people on the 9th of Av. Now they call it Tisha B'Av, which is the Jewish, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but that's okay. So I'm going to give you a list of things that happened on this. Do you remember Moses when he sent the spies into the promised land, and the spies came back and they said, oh no, don't go. And then Caleb and Joshua said, oh yeah, let's follow the Lord. That happened in 1313 BC on the 9th of Av. So they mourned that. Something else, the Solomon's temple then was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar on the 9th of Av. The second temple, which Romans destroyed, was destroyed in 70 AD on the 9th of Av. Av is a month, a Jewish month, by the way, okay? The Romans massacred the Jewish people in 133 AD on the 9th of Av. The Romans plowed through the Temple Mount and destroyed the entire city and the Temple Mount in 134 AD on the 9th of Av. Jews were expelled from England in 1290 AD on the 9th of Av. Jews were expelled or banished from Spain in 1492 on the 9th of Av. And World War I started on the 9th of Av in 1914. Isn't that the oddest thing? And when you think about it, World War I was just a continuation of World War II, which is when the Holocaust and all of that. You know what I'm saying? It was all, Germany was trying to take over in World War I. They tried to take over again in World War II, and then the Holocaust and all of that. It's just an amazing fact. I don't even know why you had to know that, but I had to tell you, because I was fascinated with it, you know.
It was all just happened.
Yeah, the people didn't, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar didn't know to destroy the temple on the 9th of Av. You know, the Romans didn't know to destroy the temple on the 9th of Av. World War II didn't start because the Jewish people had a day of mourning. I mean, World War I, rather. You know, and the 9th of Av this year is August the 11th. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, just for no reason. But I just wanted you to see how interesting. I hope nobody has a birthday that day, you know. But anyway, and what they believe is that the Messiah is going to come back and we'll make it a day of rejoicing. After all of this history, they believe their Messiah is coming back on the 9th of Av and will make it a day of rejoicing. So I thought that was kind of unique, you know, especially when that's what we're studying. And I just wanted to give you their history because I just thought it was cool. So I just find all these things and you have to have them. Okay, so now we know who these people are. We've got, what are the kingdoms? Babylon, Medes and Persians, Greece, Rome. Those four, okay? And we're calling our thing still Rome, and Rome will still be in the tribulation, okay? Still the Roman government of the tribulation, right? The only difference is we'll see is you'll have 10 kings come up that will be part of our world today, okay? Y'all look like I just lost you. I know. This is going to get deep, okay? So let's jump in here, and we're going to compare Revelation, because John, what's really cool is that John saw the exact same vision that Daniel saw. Only Daniel saw it 500 years before Jesus, and John saw it right after Jesus, you know, right before he died, 100 years, maybe 80 years after Jesus was ascended. So, but the difference is that Daniel just gave us bits and pieces. He gave us an introduction. And then John gives us the details. And Daniel even says in first verse, he says, then I wrote down the dream telling the main facts. That's Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. 7, verse 1, sorry. He wrote down the main facts in 7:1. That was it. So he may have seen all of the things that John saw, but he didn't write them all down. So let's jump in here. Look at verse 15 is where we're going to jump back. Okay? Since we know these guys, and that's who was described in the first 15 verses, we're going to start there. And Daniel had he was grieving. He says, and I grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of the visions of my head troubled me. I like the way that the Jewish wording here, or the wording here, is not actually within my body. Daniel said, in the midst of its sheath. And I thought, now isn't that cool? I wrote it on your papers there. In the midst of its sheath. It reminds me of a sword with a sheath that the sword goes down into. That's how Daniel looked at his body and spirit. His spirit was grieving in the midst of his sheath. In other words, his body just held his spirit. And that's what happens with us today. We get so, because that's what we feel and what we experience is our body, we don't realize it's our spirit that our body holds. Until, we go to a funeral home and there's a body and no spirit, and you realize it's just a holding place for that person, for that person's spirit. And that's what Daniel was saying here. He says, my soul is so heavy, it's like wanting to explode out of my body. That's the feeling I got from reading this and studying this. He was so grieved by this. Now, heck, I would be too. If I was laying there in the bed and I saw these, this lion with wings, and I saw the bear with the ribs in his teeth, and I saw the leopard with the 4 heads, and then we saw this indescribable beast. I mean, this guy was horrible. He didn't have any way to be described. I would be a little upset, and my spirit would be wanting to come out of my body too. I just want us to feel that awfulness, okay? He does go on, and we'll talk about that too, but let's go on. In verse 16, he says, and I came to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all things. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Remember in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar asked Daniel, what is this interpretation? Well, here in chapter 7, Daniel is asking an angel, and I think, my opinion, this was probably Gabriel, because Gabriel talks to Daniel later on too, but it could be just a regular old angel standing there too, but I just was thinking Gabriel. Don't ask me why I don't have it written down or anything else, but he wanted to understand. Not only did he want you to not only did Daniel want to be told what all this meant, but he wanted to understand it, and that's what I want us to do today. I want us to try to understand it. So I don't want to rush through. And if we have questions, I want you to ask, because I want us to understand it. Remember, we talked about the apocalyptic literature as being a gift. God wants us, the reason he uses it, because he wants us to study his word and figure it out. And the reason we study prophecy, do you ever think about why we study prophecy? Why is it important to study prophecy? Because dang, that's the only hope we have. If we can see that God's in control of all the bad things going on around us, then we have hope, because we can see that he's going to take care of it in the end. He's going to judge the bad things that are happening to us. I'll tell you what, this last week with all these new laws that are going into effect in New York, the one with the abortion, where they can abort babies until they're delivered, So if the baby was born at 12:05, he can be aborted until he's at 12:04, and that's okay. And I don't understand where people's consciences are. Do they not have a conscience? Do they not see that? See, I have 3 newborns in my world, so I'm like, how do you do that to that baby, Or in Ellie, my oldest one, she's oldest in my new group. She's 2.5. She was a month and a half early, and a wonderful, healthy little girl. And I'm thinking, how do they do that? How do they come to grips with that and hurt those babies? And I'm not trying to get into abortion. Obviously, I think abortion is wrong, but I don't want to condemn the women, because I know some people go through that. But what I'm saying is, who is taking care of those babies? It just breaks my heart. And then we have Debbie over here in our church, who is 60-something years old and has a newborn, because she's going to take care of that baby, her great-great-grandson, And I don't understand it, but God.
I think there's a generational divide in that.
Oh, I do too.
Because to me, abortion means
Mhm.
you've been out, you messed around, you got in trouble.
Right.
You don't want the inconvenience of
Right.
having an abortion.
Right.
And I think their side of it is health-wise, if there's you cannot carry a baby for 9 months and have
Right.
the feeling of
Right.
that
Right.
life
But now
into
see, that's the way I understood it.
It's like a health issue thing, I think.
Right.
So I think it's just a generational.
Yeah, well, the way I understood it, it just, if you decided you didn't want it, had nothing to do with
That's-
health.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what it means to me.
Yeah,
But, I mean, because you can deliver a baby after.
right.
Like you said,
20.
you have 4 months or 5 months, you can deliver
Yeah.
it.
Our grandbabies were early, yeah.
But I think it's a medical reason is what, I just
Mhm.
think the name is the bad. I
Yeah,
think the name is
the bad thing,
right.
right. But now, what I really like about Iowa, I think, they have a new law that says that you can't abort a baby after they can hear the heartbeat. And I thought, now that's cool. Because that gives you, 6 weeks to figure out what's happening. And I still think the baby should be born, but that's just my opinion. I think if you're pregnant, that baby is not a mistake. That baby is not a mistake.
God
You
had a
know.
reason.
Yeah, God had a reason, right. But at least, if we're gonna do it legally, at least they're not doing it after they can hear a heartbeat.
But I think the definitions are muddled.
Yeah, they are. They are. You're right about that. So, but that's why we study prophecy, is because we see all this horrendous things. They're passing laws that say you can't counsel young adults or children that are gender. They don't know what gender they are. Gender confused. You can't counsel them. It's against the law. And I'm like, okay. And I mean, it's amazing.
That means they're wanting help somewhere.
Yeah, exactly, you would think. That they're not allowed to help them. And all of this, and it's going so far, so fast, exactly. And so what I'm hoping we can do as we study prophecy is literally see it come to pass and literally know that it's going to end. And that, God's going to take care of it, because it really is coming to pass fast. It really is. So let's, I don't even know where I'm at. Verse 17. Okay, so Daniel's asking for an interpretation. I get a kick out of the fact that the angel gave Daniel an interpretation and only took 2 verses. Those great beasts were 4 kings, and you guys win. I just thought that was wonderful. It was like so short and to the point. That's all we need to know. Those beasts were 4 kings which arise out of the earth, which means they were Gentile kings, okay? And then it says, and the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever, forever and ever. I love the double, 4 times. He says, forever and ever, forever and ever. Now, the question was asked, well, I thought Jesus was going to come and reign for 1,000 years. And he is. And then he's going to reign the rest of the time too. He's going to have this 1,000-year reign on the earth, but then the earth is going to be a new heaven, a new earth, but Jesus is still going to be reigning, okay? And he gives that to us. That is just so amazing, and we're going to get into that a little bit later too. So I want you to look at Luke chapter 21, because this that we're studying is called the times of the Gentiles, and Luke talks about the times of the Gentiles in chapter 21. And I want you to see what the times of the Gentiles looks like. If I can get my pages to turn. Luke 21, verse 24. Well, let's look at verse 22. It says, For these are the days of vengeance, and all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon the people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword, and be led away captive into the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Do you see? That's what we're in. the times of the Gentiles, okay? And I wanted you to see what it's, you know, it's going to be like, because it's just going to be crazy. Look then with me at, wait, I wanted you to stay there for just a minute. In Romans, just go to Romans 1. I didn't put this in your lesson, I mean on your paper, but I do want you to go to Romans 1, and we're going to end up in Romans 11. Romans chapter 1. So what does the end of the times of the Gentiles look like? It says, Paul in verse 16 says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek." Verse 18 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them." In other words, they all know what's right and what's wrong. They all have consciences. But look down at verse 21. It says, "Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and foolish hearts were darkened. They professed to be wise, but they became fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like the corruptible man or birds or for." In other words, what he's saying here is, instead of worshiping God, they started worshiping all these things, man and four-footed. "Therefore," look what happened, "God gave them up to uncleanness and to the lust of their hearts, and to dishonor their body among themselves." God gave them up. He told them who he was. They said, "Stick it in your ear." And God said, "Okay," because he's a gentleman. Do you see that? Hi, Joy. Then, I'm glad you're here. Then in verse 24, he goes on, he says, in this thing, he says, verse 25, "Who exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than creator. Therefore, this reason God gave them up to their vile passions. For even their women exchanged their natural youth for what is against for what is against nature." Does that sound familiar, y'all? "Likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned with lust for another, one for another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error which is due." Notice this. They will receive in themselves the penalty of the error which is due. God will judge. They'll know within themselves. There'll be that burning, that longing, that confusion. But it goes on, and he says, and then he goes on, and I want you to see, he says, what the world is going to be like. Look at verse 28, and it says, "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge," that's why they didn't do it, "God gave them over to a debased or reprobate mind to do those things which are not fitting." In other words, they think it's okay. God gave them over to the mind that they wanted. They think it's okay. So he goes on, and he says, "Being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil mindedness, and they are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents." I love the way they throw that in there. "Undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, and unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve those who practiced them." What I want you to see is this is where the world is now. Now I want you to notice, if you'll notice one more thing since we're going there, verse 2 of chapter 2 says, but ye know that the judgment of God is according to the truth in those who practice it. Do you, and then he goes on, and I've lost it. Anyway, the next verse I was looking for was talking about how we too have been that way. We can't judge people because we've been there, but God will do the judging, you know, but we're not supposed to because we've been right where they are. We may not do all these things, but we've done some of those things. I'm in that list too. Now look at Romans chapter 11. Not only are we in the last days, but we're also, I mean, the times of the Gentiles. But there's something else that's going to happen when the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And I want you to know this. Romans chapter 11 gives a great explanation of what I'm talking about. But verse 25 says, for I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery. The mystery he's talking about is the church and why the Jewish people are not being part of the church. The nation is not understanding this. He says, lest you should be wise in your own opinion. In other words, don't think that God's done something for you and he's not, that you're better than they are. Okay? And we're talking about the nation of Israel here. It says, and the blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come. The fullness of the Gentiles ends at the rapture. When the fullness of the times of the Gentiles has come, and so all of Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob, for this is my covenant with them, and I will take away their sins. In other words, God gave us an opportunity as Gentiles to get to know him, and what he did was he gave them the space in between. So there's two things that are happening with the times of the Gentiles, okay? Let's go back to Daniel now. I just kind of wanted to throw that in there. Back to Daniel chapter 18. Now I've given you a whole bunch of questions, things to question now, didn't I? Daniel chapter 18. Chapter 7, verse 18. Sorry, there is no Daniel 18. Chapter 7, verse 18. It says, but the saints and the holy high, the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. I want you to notice who are the saints. There are two groups, and a lot of preachers I hear say the saints are Israel, because in Exodus chapter 19 verse 6 it says the saints are Israel. Okay, but to me, if you go to 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9 and 10, it says that we are the saints, that we are a chosen people. And what I think is this is end time prophecies. I think we're just going to all be mixed together. I don't think there's going to be a Jew and Gentile. I don't think there's going to be a church in the nation of Israel. It's going to be God's saints, right? That's how I see it. So those are the scriptures that I gave you to kind of back that up. And you can look those up there on your own too, but I just wanted you to understand what I thought. Because, okay, now there's another thing. Who are these saints that are going to have to go through all of this? Who are the saints that are going to have to go through the tribulation? The Jews and anybody else that's saved during that time, because we're going to be out of here. So all of this that we're getting ready to study about the fourth beast, we aren't going to experience. But we will, by studying them, see how the world is getting really close to being this fourth beast. Okay, so let's jump back in here. It says, verse 19, and I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast. In other words, Daniel didn't care about the first three, or he didn't, wasn't as scary as to him as the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with teeth of iron and nails of bronze, which devoured and broke into pieces and trampled the residue in its feet, and its 10 horns, which were on its head, and another horn that came up before, which 3 fell, namely the horn, namely that horn had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous or great words, whose appearance is greater than all his fellows. Notice something real quick. We got this, and I'm going to try to draw it up here. We're going to use circles since we're not doing this. We got these 4 guys, right? 2, 3, 4. This is Babylon. This is the Medes and Persians. This is Greece. And this is Rome. Okay? Rome. Okay. This little guy here has the 10 horns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not these guys. Okay, you see that? The 10 horns are only on the Roman beast. The Roman on George, the Roman beast. Okay? I want you to make sure you understand that, because when we get into Revelation, it's going to make more sense. Okay? So we got this horrible, awful beast. He's completely awful. And then we got the 10 horns, okay? Notice that this guy spoke, he had eyes. In other words, when they say there's eyes or there's a lot of eyes, he's very intelligent. This guy is this little horn that we're going to see. It says in verse 21, and I was watching, and the same horn that was making war against the saints prevailed. In other words, this little horn that came up, there was a little horn that came up, okay? We got 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This little guy, he comes up, and he destroys these 3, so the rest of these guys follow him, okay? Does that, you got that so far, right? This is only, doesn't look like a little horn there, but anyway, that's the little horn, and he's there being followed, and he's being followed. This little guy, he's the Antichrist. He is a person. He will be very smart. He will be intelligent. He will be good looking. He will be able to, he'll have so much charisma, he will be able to tell the whole world that I got this, and I'm going to take care of you. And the whole world will believe him, because he's going to be the guy in charge. These 10 nations will come together. By the way, when we see 10 nations come together, to start looking up, because it could be any 10 nations, it could be a group of 10 people. But anyway, those 10, out of those 10 nations, out of those groups of 10 that are in the future, one man is going to come out of that. And he's going to be gorgeous, and he's going to be brilliant, and he's going to be everything everybody ever could imagine. He's going to be he's going to be magnetic. I guess that's a good word. And that's what I want you to understand there. That's when they're talking about here. Verse 21, he says, and I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. Notice something about, about this. Who was he making war against? The saints, the people that were saved, and the Jewish people. That's what they did. This guy, that's why I wanted to give this guy a name. This Antichrist was doing his best to destroy the one, because he wants a one world church, and Christians and Christianity and Jewish people who are following now Jesus, the Messiah, are not part of that. Okay, so let's go on, and we'll turn your page. By the way, I got 22 on there twice. Don't ask me why. I don't even know how it happened. But it says all of these things are going to be at war, and it's going to be horrible. And the judgment is going to be terrible for these people. Life will be awful until, I love the until, the Ancient of Days came. If you look at verse 9, the Ancient of Days is written out there. It's a description of the Father, and he says that his garments were white as snow, his hair is like that of pure wool, and his throne was a fiery furnace, and its wheels were burning fire. This is the only description of the Father in the Bible until we get to the end of Revelation. And I just thought that was a neat thought. This is the only time he's described. Okay? So let's go on. And then I want you to notice, until the Ancient of Days, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Look how God worded that. A judgment was made. In other words, they went to trial. God not only, God is God, so he can go in and say, bam, you're dead. But he didn't. He takes them to a trial. And he says, this is what you did wrong. And that's why you're going. You didn't accept Christ. That's why you're going. All of the things that we're seeing, all the abortions and the homosexuality and all of the things that to us seem so horrible, is not that big a deal to God, because there's only one sin, and that sin is not accepting his son as their Savior. Unless they know Jesus, they will go to hell. It doesn't matter how good they are or how bad they are. They have to know who Jesus is. They have to know him as the Savior. Do you see what I'm saying? The things that we're studying, the horrible things that we're talking about, are just signs of the end coming. The end is coming. It's coming fast. It's coming furiously. And that's what I wanted you to see. And I don't know if I got this in here, but I really wanted to. Okay, well, we'll go on. It says, for the time came, and then he said, verse 23, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom. That's the fourth kingdom, okay? Which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth and trample it into pieces. And the 10 horns, you see the 10 horns there, are 10 kings. Who shall arise from this kingdom? That's the first 3.5 years. The first 3.5 years are going to be very peaceful. There's going to be 10 nations. They're going to come together. They're going to elect this one little horn guy, that Antichrist, and he's going to bring wonderful stuff, and the world will be wonderful. Okay? Do you see how it says? And then another, this is the little horn, another shall arise after him, and he shall be different from the first ones. Now, he will subdue 3 kings. In other words, he's gonna conquer 3 kings so that he gets his authority strong. Okay? In other words, the other, what, 7, 8, 9, 10? Yeah, 7 will back down after they see that this Antichrist has gotten control of the 3 kingdoms. Okay? You're with me so far? Okay, good. And it goes on, it says in verse 25, and he shall speak pompous words, blasphemous words, great words, against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High. And okay, so I want you to notice the things he's going to do. And I wrote them down here in verse 20, and on your paper, in verse 25, I'm just going to read 25, and then we'll go back and look at what I wrote down. He will speak the pompous words of the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High. He shall intend to change the times and the laws, and then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a times. See, he's the first 3.5 years he's going to persecute the saints, and the last 3.5 years he's going to actually get them. Do you see how horrible this is going to be? Now look at what this Antichrist guy does. I got him there on your page. First of all, he blasphemes God. Secondly, he persecutes the saints. He changes all the laws. He changes the calendar and the time. So our calendars won't even be the same. He makes the highest worldly civilization ever known. This will be this civilization, when he takes over, will be the most knowledgeable. It'll be all technology. It will be the highest civilization ever known. I don't know how else to say that, but you see where I'm going with that? They will be the smartest. They will be the richest. They will be the best, the most extreme human civilization. The best one you can ever imagine is the one the Antichrist is going to be in control of. Does that make sense? You see where I'm going with that? You know, because we look at where we're at now. We're a lot better off now than we were even 20 years ago with the technology and the income and all of that type of thing. I'm not talking about morals. I'm talking about, the stuff, the material stuff. Okay, number 5 rather. He unites the entire world under him, and in his world, okay, he uses atheism, anti-theism, and autotheism to control it. In other words, there's no God. That's atheism. The word A, the part A part, theism means God. Okay, so A is no God. Anti-theism means against God, and autotheism means I'm God. Does that not just sound like our world? There is no God. If there is a God, I'm against him because I'm God. I'm the one in charge. I am the most important. And that's how he reaches the world. That's how they worship him, because they like it. They're not accountable to anybody but themselves. If it feels good, do it. If you think that's the way it should be, then that's the way it should be. That's exactly where we're going. You know, if it doesn't matter what's right or wrong. It doesn't. And that's the world we live in now, and that's the world he's going to live in. And then the last thing he says in number 7, the saints will suffer and be worn down. They will just be worn out. They will not be killed. I mean, some of them will be killed, but he's just going to nag the crap out of them.
So the saints, there'll still be saints here at this time?
Not the church. The Jewish saints, the people that accept Christ that are Jewish. After, yeah, this is during the tribulation, okay? After the rapture. We won't be here. This is not us. Yeah, no. Yeah, don't let it get you scared. Okay, and then it says, and the great tribulation, the tribulation actually lasts 7 years. The first 3.5 are fairly peaceful under his rule, and then the last 3.5 are horrendous, and they call it the Great Tribulation. The Bible calls it the Great Tribulation. And the reason we know that is because the times, and half a time. The word time in Jeremiah tells us that time means 1 year. And in Hebrew, they have a word for 2. In other words, we have the same kind of word. We say both. We say, you know, when we're talking, we'll say one or both or a few. And we all understand that means 1, 2, or 3. Okay? They have time, times, and half a time. So that times is 2. Okay? And then the half a time is 6 months or half a year. Okay? So we got 3.5 years. Time, times, and half a time. And so the tribulation of 7 years is broken down into 3.5 years of peace and safety and harmony, and 3.5 years where the Antichrist takes over completely and makes everybody worship him. Okay? This is what Daniel is seeing. This has got to be scaring that poor man to death. You know? I mean, it's scary for us, and we know we ain't going to be here.
So how did Jesus come to know God after everybody's gone? Or Jesus after everybody's gone?
God opens their eyes.
Okay.
Because what we read in chapter Romans 11, it will explain it a lot more detailed. That's why I wrote it down there in your papers for you. Romans 11 shows that God closed their eyes so that we could have the time of the Gentiles, and then he will open their eyes after we leave. But they disregarded Jesus as the Messiah, and so he closed their eyes. And now he'll open them again because they are his chosen people. Okay? I don't ever want you to think the church took their place. There's a theology out there now that says the church is now the nation of Israel, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but they don't read their Bible very well or something. I don't know. But anyway, it's a big theology, though. It's called, oh, dang, I can't remember the word, but anyway, where we take their place. You know, the church takes their place. Okay, so I want you to take a minute and turn your papers over to the 4th page. Are you really confused now? Have we got this? We got 4 kingdoms. The last kingdom is Rome, and in the future, after the rapture, there's going to be 10 guys, 10 kingdoms, 10 nations are going to get together, and this one little Antichrist guy is going to go, and that's why I called him George, because he needs a name so it doesn't seem so odd, but I don't like the name George for him. But anyway, the Antichrist guy then takes over 3 kingdoms, and the rest of them follow in order. Okay, that's where we're at. You got this. That's what's happening in the first 3.5 years. I want you to look at what John saw. Okay, so instead of us going back and forth, I want you to take this last page, and I want you to look at, I want to go over it with you just real quick, and I want you with your pencil to underline things that you learned from chapter 7. Does that make sense? So it says, verse 1 says, oh, and I've got this written out in the New Living Translations because I'm hoping that will help us understand it better. Okay, it says, I saw the beast rising up out of the sea. What does Daniel chapter 7 verse 1 say? Or 2? I saw in my vision in night, behold, 4 winds of heaven stirring the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea. It's exact. Okay? Now, John is only seeing the 4th beast. And the reason John is only seeing the 4th beast is because these other 3 have already happened. John shows up here, okay? Babylon, the Medes and Persians, and Greece are all gone, and Rome is in charge. So John's only going to see that 4th beast, okay? That's why he says a beast, rising up out of the sea. So there's one thing that we see, just underline it. And it had 7 heads and 10 horns. Now I'm going to get really confused here. I'm going to confuse you really, really good. So you hang on. Tell me what you think. I just told you the beast that Daniel saw was 4. Why does John see 7? Because Babylon was not the first empire. The first empire was Egypt. You remember that's where the Israelites came out of. And then the second great empire was Assyria, and they took over the 10 kingdoms. And Jonah, you remember Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh? That's because Nineveh was the capital of the world at the time, and they were evil, and Jonah didn't want to go tell them people about Nineveh. So the 7 heads are Egypt and Assyria. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're going to call this one Rome 2 because that's where we're at. This Rome was when Rome was in charge. Does that make sense? Rome was in charge, and then they disintegrated into the feet and the toes, and they became what we are today. Okay? You got that? No, not at all. Let me tell you one more thing. The 7th heads, all it is the 7 different kingdoms that are Gentile kingdoms, the 7 different kingdoms that are world kingdoms, the 7 different kingdoms of history. That's it, okay? So all you have to understand about this 7-headed guy was that he was a composite of all of the kingdoms. That's probably why he looked so horrible and wasn't completely, he was completely indescribable, because this 4th king was a composite of all these kingdoms. All the evil that you could possibly think of for all of these kingdoms was in that last king, okay? So this beast, one beast that John saw, when John saw it, he saw all of humanity and all the evil of humanity in that beast. And that's what's represented by the 7 heads. Does that help any? Kind of? Clear as mud. Okay. Now, it goes on and it says, and on the 7 heads were 10 horns. There's the 10 horns on the last little guy there. And 10 crowns on its horns. In other words, these guys were kings. So we got this. This is Revelation we're reading, and it's telling us exactly what Daniel just told us, because they both saw the exact same vision, but John gives us more detail. That's why it's a little different. And it goes on, it says, and written on each head were the names of the names that blasphemed God. This beast, now watch how this beast looks. Remember I just said this is one composite beast, and he's composite of all of it. It says, he looked like a leopard, but had feet like a bear and a mouth like a lion. Hello? Daniel saw them separately. John saw them as one composite beast. Isn't that cool? Where you can see the same things. I mean, Daniel was 500 years before Jesus, and he saw the same thing that John saw. But John gave us a little more detail into what that ugly beast looked like, that fourth beast that Daniel saw. Okay? Then he goes on, he says, and I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed to be wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. Notice it says seemed to be. I want you to notice how counterfeit Satan is. Did Jesus die and rose again from the dead? Satan's going to have one of his little kings, this little horn, this Antichrist. He's going to look like he died and came back from the dead. The same thing. That's what Revelation 13 is telling us. He says, and so the whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to who? The Antichrist. Remember I told you the beast is the Antichrist. Okay? And they worshiped the dragon. Who is this dragon? Look down at the bottom of your page. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, it says, this great dragon is the ancient serpent, is called the devil or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, who was thrown down to the earth with all its angels. Who's the dragon? Satan. The beast is the Antichrist. He's a man. He's kingdom. But the dragon is Satan. And you got to make sure you get that. They worshiped Satan. Do you see what the Antichrist is going to have them worshiping? Satan. It's going to be Satan worship. It is. It says, forgiving the beast, they worship the dragon, Satan, for giving the beast such power. In other words, they knew that Satan gave this guy the ability to be revived or resurrected from the dead, except he really wasn't. He just seemed to be. And they worship the beast. Who is as great as the beast, they exclaim, and who is able to fight against him? And then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemous things against God. And he was given authority to do whatever, given authority to do whatever he wanted for 42 months, 3.5 years, on 1,260 days. He could do whatever he wanted to. He spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God. He slandered his name, his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven, and those who dwell in heaven. Notice the three things. He slandered God's name, where God lives, and God's people, those that are living in heaven. Three things. That's the three things that they slander today, but those are the three things that he slanders. He goes on, he says, and the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them, and he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language. And the people, all the people who belong to this world, worshipped the beast. Did you see this? Belong to the world. Worship the beast. And they are the ones whose names were not written in the book of life that belongs to the Lamb, who was slaughtered before the world was made. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Anyone who is destined for prison will be taken to prison. Anyone who's destined to die by the sword will die by the sword. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and faithfully. Whew. That's tough. That's just the first 10 verses of Revelation chapter 13. But now we got a feel for what it's like. We see that Daniel and John saw the same thing. I don't know if I got this in your notes or not, but I want to give this to you too. So you can turn back to, we're done with this, page 4. Okay, let's go ahead and do this part, and then I want you to see one more thing. Okay, back on page 2, and I want you to notice the things that Daniel saw and the things that John saw. I wrote down here the things that they both saw. They both saw, and I underlined the ones that are in chapter 7, okay? So first of all, Daniel didn't see the false prophet, which is the religious man that comes along, okay? He didn't see the mark of the beast. He didn't see the people being beheaded. He didn't see the image, which this guy makes an image of himself and the image talks, okay, which doesn't make, I mean, that's not hard for us to understand now. 20 years ago, we couldn't understand an image talking, but now we can. It looked like a hologram. Or, technology is making these robot-looking things. It's not a big deal to make an image that talks, But anyway, so that's what Daniel didn't see that, and he didn't see the New Jerusalem, the end of it all, okay? They both saw, though, and I wanted you to see this list. They both saw the world kingdom, the final world kingdom. They both saw the 7-year time frame. They both saw the 3.5-year rule, the split there. They both saw the rise of this man, this Antichrist. They both saw Michael, the archangel. They both saw the final kingdom as beast. In other words, they both saw it as a picture of the beast. This final kingdom was so horrendous, it was a beast. Okay? That's what they both saw in chapter 7. In chapter 7, they both saw the 10 kings with the beast. Chapter 7, they both saw the throne room of God. In chapter 7, they saw the 10,000 times 10,000 worshiping God. In chapter 7, they saw that the books were open. In chapter 7, they both saw the return of Christ. They both saw Jesus coming in the clouds. They both saw the beast burning. They both saw that the saints will finally rule, and they both saw that the everlasting kingdom. I wanted to give you a little bit about Satan because we talked about the devil. Look at here really quick. I'm not going to even go over it, but Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through, I don't know why it's on there 3 times, but like I said, I had all kinds of issues this morning copying everything 2 or 3 times. It's Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. That's the fall of Satan. That's what happened to Satan. That's when he fell and why he fell. And then I want you to notice something, and I just found this. It's on page 3, the top, and I just kind of gave you an overview. In Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13 through 16, Ezekiel describes what Satan was like before the fall. And it's really cool to know, not that it's cool. Satan was in the Garden of Eden. All the precious stones covered him. He was so beautiful. He was covered in precious stones. They only list 9 in Ezekiel, but it's a reference to all of the beauty that jewelry or stones can give. Now, another thing I wanted you to notice, he was created with timbres, which means timbrel or tambourines. In other words, he was music. All of music was created with Satan. I mean, with Lucifer. We'll call him Lucifer, son of the morning. This was God's first cherubim. He was the firstborn of the angels. He was stunning. He was all the music, the beauty of music. He was all the beauty of gems and jewels. And it goes on, it says, and he was created with pipes to hold the gems. He was on the mountain with God in heaven. He walked up and down the stones of fire. He was perfect, the most beautiful, the most perfect. And then he was cast out of the holy mountain. Why? Because his heart was lifted up because of his beauty. He was so beautiful. He was so full of this music that you can hear and the art that you can feel and the jewels that you can see. And he decided he was the greatest ever was. His beauty made him cocky. His beauty gave him the pride that Isaiah chapter 14 or 12 said that happened to him. He says, I want the world to worship me. I want the world. You know, when Jesus was here, he says, put him up on that mountain. He says, I will let you have, if you'll worship me, I'll let you have the entire world worship you. What was really funny is Jesus made the entire world, you know, but that's what he wanted, worship, because he looked at himself. Isn't that exactly what our world is doing today? Where the world looks at themselves and they say, I don't need God, I am perfect. I have everything I need. I create everything I need. Satan is doing the same thing, and that's what he did. And in verse 26 of Daniel, let's jump back in here because I really want to finish this up. Verse 26, and in chapter 9, verse 9 gives us this description. We talked about this last week, or last time we were here. The court, it says, verse 26 says, but the court, I love this, I love but the court shall be seated, and they shall take away the dominion, his dominion, and consume and destroy it forever. In the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kings under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. And his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions shall serve and obey. I want you to notice I wrote the scriptures out for you that I wanted you to see. 1 Corinthians says, don't you realize who's the court? 1 Corinthians tells us, don't you realize someday that we believers will judge the world? Since you're going to judge the world, you can't decide on these little things among yourselves. Don't you realize that you will judge angels? So you should surely be able to resolve ordinary disputes in this life. Paul says, we will be on that court. That's cool. Then he goes on in Revelation, it says, and from Jesus Christ, he is a faithful witness to these things, the first to rise from the dead, the ruler of the kings of the world. To him, all glory to him who loves us and has freed us from our sins by shedding his blood for us, and has made us a kingdom of priests for God his Father. All glory and power to him be forever and ever. Amen. I want you to notice that who is the Son of Man? And I gave you a scripture in John. I don't know why I've got this in here twice all the way through here, but that's okay. John chapter 5, verse 26 and 27 gives you a description of who Jesus is as the Son of Man. And there's one more side item I want to throw in here that I thought was really neat, and I wanted to give it to you. We always talk about the book. Did you know there's more than one book? That turn to Micah. Let me find it here. Yeah, Malachi rather, not Micah, Malachi. Malachi chapter 3, verse 16. There's like 2 or 3 other books. There's the book of the living, which is in Psalms. There's the book of life, which is the one we see in Revelation. But there's another book. And I just thought this was so cool. This book in Malachi. I can find Malachi. There we go. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 16. It says, for those who fear the Lord spoke to one another. Okay, this is people speaking to one another. The Lord listened and heard them. And so a book of remembrance was written before him for those who feared the Lord and meditated on his name. Did you see this book? God made a book of remembrance for those who talk about him. For us, we are in this book because every time we meet, we talk about Jesus. And every time we meet and talk about Jesus, he writes it down in a book. How cool is this? Every time we get to every time we get together and talk about Jesus, he hears us and writes it down. Isn't that the neatest? I love that verse, and I had to bring it to you because I was studying about the books, and it just popped out at me. And it says, and this book of remembrance is for those who fear the Lord and meditate on his name. The word meditate means to think about. Just think. Every time you think about Jesus, every time you praise his name, every time you meet together, Jesus hears your thoughts and hears your prayers, and he writes them down in a book. How cool is that book? I'm going to be in it all the time, and I can put myself in it a whole bunch of times. I mean, just think, every day, if I stop and think about Jesus, he's writing my name in that book. That's so cool. I just think it's great. It's so much hope. Now let's look at the last verse of Daniel chapter 7. What happened to Daniel? He says, and at the end of this account, and it's scary for us and we don't even understand it, and Daniel didn't understand it. He says, but at the end of this account, as for me, Daniel, my thoughts were troubled greatly within me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. I wrote on here because I thought it was cool that he kept the matter in his heart. There's one other person that we meet in the New Testament who pondered all of these things in her heart. Do you remember who that was? It was Mary. Mary saw the wonderful things that Jesus was going to be, but she also saw the suffering that he was going to have to go through. And she pondered that in her heart. How did she get through the suffering of Jesus? Because she thought about what the end was going to be like, and that he would be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He would be the one on David's throne. That's why Mary could get through all of this. How did Daniel deal with all of this horrid stuff? He kept it all in his heart, and he thought about God, and he thought about those things. You know, we suffer, and even when we're going through this world and we're suffering, look at the very last verse, and you guys can see what I wrote there about what Mary had to think about. I gave you 2 verses that Mary was thinking about, things that she pondered in her heart. Well, let's look at the one right before that. It says, and he was a light. Do you see where I'm at? Okay, this is Simeon in the temple. Jesus is 8 days old. He says, and Jesus, he is the light to reveal God to the nations. He is the glory of your people, Israel. Jesus' parents were amazed at what they had been said about him. Then Simeon blessed them, and he said to Mary, the baby's mother, this child is destined to cause many in Israel to fall, and many others to rise. He has been sent as a sign from God, but many will oppose him. As a result, the deepest thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your soul. She pondered these things in her heart. That's what she pondered. When we're suffering, think about Jesus. Put your name in that book of remembrance. When it's hard and you don't understand it, and this is one of my favorite verses that I love about going through suffering, it says, therefore do not lose heart, for even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. Remember, Daniel had that sheath around his spirit. That's what we're talking about. For our light affliction is but for a moment. I don't care how hard it gets. It's just for a moment. And he says, it's working for us far more exceeding and eternal weight and glory. And while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. In other words, don't look at what your situation and your circumstances are, but look at what we've got to go, what we've got coming. Look at how good it's going to be. Look at those things that are not seen. And he goes on, the last verse says, for those things which are seen are temporary, but those things which are not seen are eternal. Ponder in your heart the eternal things of God. That's how you get through the suffering. That's how Daniel got through all these horrible dreams. That's how Mary got through giving up her son and watching him be crucified. It was just for a moment. I remember I was telling my Sunday school classes, but none of the Sunday school classes here, so I tell you all. There was a time in my life when it was really, really bad, and my favorite verse was, it came to pass. Because what I was going through came, but it was going to go away. And so when it was really bad, I would think, it came to pass, it came to pass, it is going to go away. It will pass. Because it's temporary. Our health issues are temporary. We may have them until we die, but they're temporary. Our family issues, our money issues, any other issues we have are temporary. So write your name in that book of remembrance and get through these temporary problems by thinking about Jesus. I just thought that was so cool. I just love that he writes it down. Every time he listens to us, he listens to our thoughts, and he writes them down in a book. Keeps them. So let's pray and then we'll go. Lord, this is so much that we don't understand, and it's really not super clear yet, but I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to understand what the end times are like. Help us to understand that prophecy looks horrible because it's temporary, and that your kingdom, and that we will be with you forever and ever, forever and ever, just like Daniel said in his scriptures. I pray, Lord, that you'd hold us close. Help us to remember as we struggle through life that it's just temporary, that it came to pass, and that when we think about you, you write those thoughts down in a book, and you keep them forever. Help us to continually think about you so that we can ponder in our hearts and get through it. In your most precious name we pray. Amen. Now, next week is Daniel chapter 8, and we're going to get even deeper. We're going to dig deeper in the well. So hang on.